So this is going to be part one of a two-part video basically talking about Russia. What we're going to be talking about are sort of the reforms that happened in Russia during the late 19th and early 20th century and some of the revolutions that happened also. So let's talk about the conditions in Russia at the time. By 1815, which is the same year of the Congress of Vienna that we've studied in class, Russia had become the largest and the most populous nation in the world. So it had the most territory and it had the most people of any nation in the world. It was a massive country and they had plentiful natural resources. But despite attempts to westernize, Russia was still economically underdeveloped. They had these resources which would have been, great fuel for industrialization, but they were still behind, some of the other countries we studied like Great Britain or Germany that had had industrial revolutions and modernized themselves. Russia basically needs to modernize. It needs to catch up with these other countries. One of the obstacles to modernizing was the social structure of Russia. It was very rigid and it really doesn't lend itself to making any serious changes. Society is dominated by land-owning nobles. There was a small middle class, but the vast majority of Russians were serfs. So what's a serf? Basically, it's a laborer who's bound to land and to masters who control their fates. So these landowning nobles owned, vast amounts of land, and they had serfs who worked the land for them. And the serfs, they're a step above slavery in that they're compensated for their work, but only a small step above. They don't have any real freedom. They have to do whatever job the landowner says for them to do. So they're usually peasants, but some are also household servants, artisans, or soldiers. A lot of the Russian military actually was made up of serfs who, were forced to serve in the military without their choice. So Russia's government for centuries have been dominated by czars who rule with absolute power, and a czar is just another name for an emperor. There have been various attempts made through their history at liberal reform to help the conditions of serfs, but they're always quickly taken back to appease nobles. Again, these nobles control the majority of land in the country, and so the czars don't want to aggravate them in any real way. So where we're picking up is going to be 1855. Tsar Nicholas II comes to power during a conflict which is known as the Crimean War. And this is a picture of Nicholas right here. So the Crimean War breaks out when Russia tries to seize lands that belong to the Ottoman Empire, which are along the Danube River. So if you look at this map here, the lands Russia are trying to take are these right here. This is Russia in the yellow. This is the Ottoman Empire down here. And we've studied the Ottoman Empire in class a little bit. You've read up on it, so you should be familiar with it at this point. So Russia tries to seize some lands, and in response, Britain, France, and Sardinia all help and step in as allies of the Ottoman Empire and invade the Crimean Peninsula, which is right here in the Black Sea. Russia is relatively quickly defeated, and in that defeat, it's sort of revealed to the rest of the world just how backward and behind Russia is compared to these other European powers. Their army is not outfitted with as good weaponry as Britain or France. Their organization is sort of old-fashioned, and as a result, it sort of reveals just how behind Russia is compared to other countries in Europe. So, as a result of this poor outcome, many Russians begin protesting and they start seeking reform. And Alexander II, in response, emancipates all the serfs in 1861. So serfs are now free. They no longer have to serve a master. But that freedom does lead to some problems. The former serfs now had to buy land, but for the most part they're too poor to do that. And the lands that were allotted for peasants often were too small to successfully farm, so farmers couldn't really survive and get by even if they were able to get the money to buy land. But still, emancipation was a turning point in sort of the modernization of Russia. Alexander also has some other reforms. He sets up a system of local government. He eases some of the censorship that people were living under. He has some legal reforms. He reduces military service time and improves the conditions for soldiers, so now people in the military have a better lifestyle. And he also encourages the growth of industry. And all these reforms are attempts by Alexander to sort of set up and catch up with the European powers. And we're going to see in part two some of the effects of these.